Hey, everybody. Welcome once again to the Devout Route podcast with Mick Veach. I'm your host, as always, Michael Braden, and with me, as always, my good friend, Pastor Mick. How's it going, Mick?
I'm doing really well, Michael, and I think today our folks are going to really enjoy our podcast. I'd love for you to set that up for us.
Yes, absolutely. We have a very special guest today. I'm excited to hear his heart, talk to him a little bit, and that is Rasool Berry. And I was looking up exactly how to introduce you because you're a man of many hats, right? You are a pastor, you've been a missionary, you're a podcaster, you're the director of partnerships and content development at Our Daily Bread Ministries. You are a husband, you are a father, the one and only Rasool Berry. How you doing today, man?
I am well.
Was that good enough?
That was wonderful. That was wonderful.
You let me know if I miss any other things you want to add on.
I'm sure there's more.
How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm glad to be here with you all. The reputation of Kentwood precedes you, and even though I work at Our Daily Bread Ministries, I live in New York City. So it's always good that, when I can come up to the Midwest and to Western Michigan, especially on a nice day.
Yes.
Yeah, you picked a good week to travel. That's for sure. Because
right.
Last week wasn't, but no, this week is fantastic. But I just kind of wanted to start off easy because I think, for those who don't know you and are tuning in, just wanted to hear a little bit about kind of your faith journey and what that's kind of been like and how you got to this point of, being called to be a pastor and kind of into leadership.
Yep.
What did that look like in your background?
It's interesting because my name Rasool is Arabic. It means prophet. My parents had joined the Nation of Islam before I was born, and so my name was a reflection of that. And my parents broke up when I was young. My father was murdered when I was 7. And so I kind of grew up in a single-parent home, and with the exception of not eating pork, that was still forbidden. It kind of drifted into like more of a secular space. So by the time I was in high school, I would define myself now as a secular, self-righteous person. I thought, I guess I'm agnostic. I don't really know. I've been exposed to a lot of different religions, so didn't know where I really stood on that. But I just knew I was a good person, and that's what if there was a God up there, so I thought he must be okay with me because of my grades and my being a good guy, and all of that. God kind of shattered that distorted self-image when I was a senior in high school, which, oftentimes in high school, it was about a girl, or actually in this case about 2, which was part of the problem.
We had a player on our hands.
Look, Tails all the time.
So I was in this unique situation because I wasn't a very popular guy, but that these 2 girls liked me, and I tried to be with both.
Greeting?
Yeah. And got caught. And because you can't be a player if you don't got game. So I learned that reality. But I remember she said, you're no better than other guys. In fact, you're worse because you think you're better than them. And that was the moment that kind of God used to show me that my righteousness was like filthy rags. And I was really despondent because I really had kind of believed my hype. At this point, I was senior class president. I was National Honor Society, second in my class. And so I had achieved all these things that I thought made me this good person. But it was like, well, if there's a human who has legitimate reason to not be a fan of me, what makes me think that my resume is good enough for God? And I had no answer to that. And so I decided to just kind of come clean and confess to the other girl. And I said, hey, look, this is what I've been doing. I cheated on you, And she said, I forgive you. And I was like, did the Scooby, And I was like, why? And she said, well, Jesus has forgiven me for everything that I've done. So I don't think I should hold it against you. Well, at this point, I am confused and I am intrigued and I am attracted to this thing because I was really kind of not understanding how forgiveness could work. How could a holy God, how could you get back? How could you find redemption? And so she began to invite me to church, and I started to hear the gospel, with new ears. I wouldn't say for the first time, but for the first time in a way that wasn't filtered by my own sense of pride. And that good news was that Jesus' righteousness was sufficient for me, and that I just need to put my trust in that. And that not only could my sins be forgiven, but also that I could walk into the calling that God had for me from before I was born, and that was what I was called to do. And that was kind of like a mind-blowing journey. I ended up coming to faith in Christ, got baptized August 20th, 1995, which also happened to coincide with my freshman year in college. And so I went to the University of Pennsylvania, which is pretty secular school, known for kind of just a sense of kind of liberal arts, Ivy League kind of vibe. And in that environment, I was very quickly challenged and tested about why could you believe this stuff, with arguments that just a few months earlier I would have myself used. And that's where I got really blessed by having a roommate that was who I'm still friends with to this day from freshman year, who was a really strong Christ follower. And he introduced me to Bible study, and we entered campus ministry and just apologetics and all of this stuff. And so I started to realize that God's answers were better than our questions. And so that just kind of got me to a place where I wanted to help and support those who were also on that journey like me. And so that's when, after I graduated, taught first grade for a year, and then ended up serving in full-time ministry as a missionary at Howard University in DC. And away we went into full-time ministry ever since. So I wore a lot of different hats before, as you mentioned now. So the church that I'm at now, that I serve as teaching and family pastor, is called the Bridge Church in Brooklyn. The lead pastor and I actually started out in campus ministry together way back at Howard, our first full-time ministry. So it kind of went full circle. And so yeah, it's been kind of cool and exciting to see this journey that I never anticipated being on, but that, God, had ordained. And the one last thing I'll say that kind of God has a sense of humor. So Rasool means prophet. And so it's interesting because oftentimes when I go into Ubers, if the driver is from a Muslim background or Arab, they'll about half the time I'll say, "Do you know what your name means?" You
get a quick acceptance when you need a ride.
And they're like, "So you're a Muslim?" And I go, "No, I'm actually a Christian pastor." And sometimes they're like, "So how did that happen?" And
that's a great.
That's my segue into sharing my story.
Well, that's
awesome.
That's
so powerful what you just shared, because although our stories are all different, really what I heard you say is that through these circumstances in your life, there's this encounter with Jesus. And that encounter was so real for you that you've committed the rest of your life that you want other people to have that same experience somehow, some way that you could contribute, which is, to me, like really the core of it, right? Everything else is secondary. All the hats that Pastor Michael was saying that you have and exposures, God opened up, but it all comes from the who you are and what you encountered at that moment, and becomes this driving force.
Yeah, there is this sense where there was a shift in my own thinking. I think in my younger years, in my zealousness, I thought that the mission and the goal was to convince people that Jesus was real and to follow God. And I realize now that that's the role of the Holy Spirit, that all we do, what I see my role, and even my understanding of apologetics, is I used to get into debates. I used to argue all the time. And I started to realize that no. The goal isn't to try to convince anybody. You can't do that. But it's to move out all the obstacles that might be, that are man-made obstacles oftentimes, or that are just stumbling blocks, that are in the way of causing people to, that might miss the Lord, in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, Paul talks about, how, the Greeks seek wisdom and the Jews seek a sign, but we preach Christ and him crucified, a stumbling block, to the Greeks, foolishness, right? But to those who are being saved, the power of God unto salvation. And there's a lot of stumbling blocks that our culture, how we are raised, some of our preconceived notions, and even the church has put in the way sometimes. And I think the more we can move those out the way, whether it's through media, whether it's through conversations like this, whether it's through the preaching of the word, that we just got to find a lot of different ways so that people can see clearly, the Messiah, and kind of wrestle with him and not with the frailty of humanity.
That's good too, yeah. And I wanted to ask you, one of the things I love about when we get guests on here that aren't in our circle necessarily is that we really love to hear their view of the church and what they see in their travels and their experiences. So I want to hear from you, being a pastor and where you're at, and also traveling, doing other things. Where do you see the current status of the church? What do you see the church doing right? Where do you see where the church needs to step up and kind of take initiative? Like what has been your experience?
Well, that's pretty open-ended, isn't it?
It is. But at the same time, I'm happy for it. I'm here for it because I think there's a couple of points of threads that I want to try to pull together. So one is this thread of time and timeliness. We just, for those that observe the church calendar, we just observed Pentecost, the day of Pentecost, on this past Sunday, and it's the birth of the church, where the Holy Spirit descends upon the disciples, and in this dynamic and dramatic sign, has people understand the gospel and the praising of God in their various different languages. This was in many ways a reversal of the Tower of Babel, where the languages confused the folks and kind of created this sense of division. And all of the rest of the story in the book of Acts, which is the story of the early church, is this unveiling of a mystery that Paul talks about, of the power of the gospel to bring us together across differences ethnically, linguistically, politically, culturally. That's our story. That's what we get to inherit, right? And I know this is no stranger who I'm talking to at Kentwood, where it's you literally, when you come into campus, see, we're a church of the nations and for the nations. And that is such a prolific statement, particularly in the contrast, in the backdrop of our current American moment, where more than anything, we are in a polarized society. We hear that phrase and it's almost become trite to say, but it's still true. That whether that's politically, whether that's economically, there's so many different, Charles Dickens wrote in The Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. Yeah. And what is the church called to do in that kind of moment? Well, we have the blueprint before in Acts, where we see after Peter preaches in Acts chapter 2, and the Spirit draws 3,000 to himself. And it says that they shared in the apostles' teaching, the breaking of bread, the fellowship, and that they had all things in common with one another. And this was a radical repudiation and rejection of Roman norms, which Rome was a class stratified society. You had slaves who were at the bottom of the food chain, so to speak, and you had the Roman citizen at the top. You had men and you had women who were considered not even second-class citizens, something else. They couldn't vote. They didn't have choices. You had all of these different things where people were seen as different barbarians, lesser than Rome, civilized. And in the midst of that, you see the church being this different kind of thing, this thing where people are coming together across these differences and not ignoring those differences, but also not using them as a point of division, but using them as a point of an asset to try to highlight something deeper and more true and more meaningful. And it is actually the diversity of their economic, their cultural, their ethnic dimensions that makes a distinction and a uniqueness to say what's happening over there. And I love Acts chapter 6 in particular, where you see this issue arise, because it's not easy, it's messy, right? And there's this issue with the Hellenistic Jewish widows being neglected in the daily distribution of food. And this is a incredibly important ethical issue and concern for the church, because if they gloss over it, then it means that they're just like everybody else. The difference, the Hellenistic Jewish widows, they were from the diaspora. They looked different. They probably were more likely to be intermingled with the people around them from Babylon, from Egypt, from other places, versus the Hebraic Jews, which would have been those who stayed. These were the good old boys from Galilee and from Jerusalem, like the disciples. They knew Aramaic and Hebrew. They were familiar with the things. And so the thing that's fascinating is they're the ones in charge. And so when this dispute, this complaint arises, it is those who are in power, those who are in charge, the Hebraic Jewish disciples, who actually empower and appoint those from the Hellenistic Jewish side. That's why Luke is so careful to name the names, like Philip, like Nathaniel, like Timon, like all of these folks, Stephen, who is the first martyr, to highlight the fact that they empower the folks who were on the margins so that they can make right something that was broken and wrong. And I think that, so bringing it all back together to what I see in the country is, I see we're at a inflection moment where the church can either be a thermostat to the culture, as Dr. King said, or a thermometer. A thermometer just literally reflects the temperature in the room. A thermostat adjusts the temperature in the room. It actually becomes a change agent. And I think across all of those type of things that divide us, that is at its best, that's what the church can offer, is a reprieve and a vision for what it looks like for us to have a kingdom vision of reality and of each other. But all too often, at its we're falling short of that, and we're seeing actually the church, through things like Christian nationalism and other forms of isolation, we're seeing the church be used as a justification for the very divisions and polarization. And so those are the things that I'm seeing right now that I'm kind of concerned about, like that I feel like we need to get back to the original model that we see in the book of Acts to say, are we looking more like that?
That's a great point. I think that's a perfect illustration. And on top of that, I know, you've talked about this in other podcasts and on your own podcast, like just the heart you have for the younger generation.
Yeah.
And kind of along the lines of what you just talked about, like, how do you see their perspective of the church from that? Like, kind of what you're saying is like this defining moment. Is the church going to step up and take charge? Is that also what you hear echoed from the younger generations that you engage
I
with?
think also that Dickens' best of times, worst of times thing can kind of emerge, because on one aspect, and by many indicators, if you looked at over the last 30 years, 40 years, you see significant decline in church membership. The nuns, the rise of the nuns, not the N-U-N-S, but the N-O-N-E-S, those who have no longer church affiliation. And many of them, you look at Barna research and others, cite these very contradictions within the church, the political, the politicization, the partisanship, the division, as the reasons why they've become disenchanted and disillusioned. And so there's that reality. That's one reaction where folks are like, you know what, I'm good. I don't need this. This just feels like another social club, political group. But that's not the full story. There's also among Gen Z and even Alpha now that's coming afterwards, where you have a growing number of people who don't have any church experience because their parents had already left, and so there's and so you're really starting from more of a blank slate, what I mean, at least apart from what they may have seen in media and depictions. But in terms of their own personal experience, there's this yearning. And so for the first time, we saw, I believe in the last census, that church attendance among younger generations didn't decline. It actually slightly increased and kind of stayed steady. And people have really been intrigued by that, like what's going on, what's happening. I think that it's a combination of different things, the sense of the rise of anxiety and these kind of mental health challenges, the disappointed, empty promises of postmodernity and secularism that don't really tell a holistic story that I can actually make sense of my world and that there's something for me to do. I think some of that has gone. And I think in the midst of that, there's an opportunity for us to tell a better story than you're just here to make money or just here for materialistic reasons. And that there is a vision for us coming together that we can be a part of. But part of that, I think, also involves something that we are very focused on at our Daily Bread Ministries, which is Bible engagement. That what do they experience when they get here, right? Like, is this just going to be a scenario where we just water everything down so that people have an inspirational moment, but that's not going to be a life-changing experience. We are committed to, whether it's through audio means, visual storytelling, but bringing people to the scriptures, because that's where we believe that the life-changing wisdom of the Bible, that's our Daily Bread Ministries mission, is going to actually be transformative. And so I have hope and I have encouragement. And I mean, the average age of my church in Brooklyn, New York is 28, 29 years old. They're mostly single, they're diverse, and they're coming from all over the place. And they're coming with a yearning for more than what they've experienced. And so I'm seeing that grow as a reality, but I also know we have challenges ahead.
I think you hit a key point is that there's this generation removed from all of the history, right? I'm sad that we have a generation knows nothing, which is a very dangerous place to be as a society as a whole. But I'm old enough where I came out of the era of that we entertained. It was all seeker sensitive. It was all about consumerism, etc. And what I'm hearing you say is that there's this refreshment where there's this newer generation desiring authenticity and truth, and don't play me, don't entertain me, kind of a thing. That's what we're experiencing here in West Michigan, at least here at our church. Do you see that across the board, that there's this new hunger that's actually a turn off what we've been doing for years as it relates to what church is to that generation?
Yeah, I mean, you said it with the word authenticity, and that's something that younger generations have yearned for. And I think especially we have to also recognize that part of the departures from church is also just a broader departure from trust in institutions in general, whether that be like political parties, which, are declining in number, or unions, or whatever it is that what used to be the kind of institutions that people identified themselves as, even working, right? Like, I mean, previous generations, they worked at the same place for 50 years, 40 years. This generation, if you get them for 3, you doing great.
Right,
what I mean? And so, and I'm not judging that. I'm just making observations that because of all of those different access to the failings and shortcomings of authority and institutions, that there's a lot of different reasons why people are kind of disillusioned and suspicious. And so that makes authenticity absolutely essential. What are you, can I trust you, right? And if I can trust you, are you trying to sell me something, or are you trying to give me something of meaning and truth? And that's where the truth of the scripture becomes our foundational piece, because it is the thing that we can say, this makes us all equal at the foot of the cross. There's no, we all have access to it. There's no kind of secrecy around it. This is where we're trying to go to. This is our blueprint. And I do think that there is a yearning for that among some, but I don't want to paint an over rosy picture, because we also live in contested space. We also live in a very distracted generation where, those glowing rectangles that we all have, get us to a place where it's hard for people to even read. Literacy is going down. Attention spans are going down. And so we have to be very thoughtful and creative, and even honest with ourselves about what's working and what's not working. Gone are the days where we could just pat ourselves on the back because we did something. It's like we have to really be thoughtful about, is what we're doing actually effective? And if not, what do we need to do to pivot?
It's interesting that each generation brings strengths and weaknesses. And I've always said to our team that we have to be really careful that we have this subtle and sometimes not so subtle way of making Gen Z feel as though they're just lazy, they don't want to work. If you were like Gen X or older millennials, then we would and what we have said is, like, there's strengths and weaknesses to all. Let's try to embrace that and have conversations. And what we've tried to do here, because we have even Carrie that runs our communication, is on our communications team running this podcast, is in that conversation that we've had with people between 28 and 35 years of age, and asking them, actually, we've had open table on our team and saying, hey, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? And respecting one another rather than drawing lines, because we have this propensity, don't we, to go into what I call sameness clusters. We're around people that think like us. I'm a Chicago Cubs fan. I always use the Cubs as an example. It drives my wife crazy. We can be anywhere in the country. We run across a Cub fan, and he and I, or she and I, will immediately start talking without any connection, because that's our connection, right? So that's natural, but it takes intentionality. Especially being a church of multiculturalism of our church, it's not just that, it's generational, that we have to be intentional with all of that. And it takes a lot of work, a lot of grace, a lot of intentionality to the relationships to help us to move through that. But with that being said, my question to you is that where do you see us as a church, going back to Michael's question, as it relates to that? Like, do you feel like we're catching that? Do you feel like the church overall, or is that something that you could say, I don't know, or this is what I'm feeling as it relates to that we're really addressing that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I got to address the generational thing because I'm Gen X. And I mean, just think about that. I remember when that came out, X. It was like the unknown generation. What's wrong with them? They play video games. And I think that was the first time that there was a lot of conversation about a particular generation, like in a sense of angst, because they were uniquely different than the previous. And I just always remember thinking, like, but we didn't raise ourselves, like, so boomers, I think you need to look in the mirror, like, so it's always funny to me when like other generations like start to criticize the like the one that's there, because like we created the world in which they're inhabiting, so it's not like they just a group of people just all agreed,
dropped off a ship,
you're right, yeah, like, just say, hey, you know what, let's be less committed to our jobs and more likely, I mean, so in any case, that's a little sidebar, but I think that part of the answers today is just nuance and complexity. That's where we live in, every so I think it depends. I think in some places and spaces we can see progress in terms of how the church is showing up, but I think in a lot of places we can see regression and as well. And I love what you said about the meetings and creating space to ask the questions, to invite the feedback from different generations, because we need that, you know what I mean? And there needs to be space created because there is a power dynamic that exists oftentimes with those who are in charge, especially in church spaces. I mean, literally, we have a group called elders, right? Like, and I'm an elder at my church, so no shade on that. But when you think about it, that's a unique kind of generational term that says we are in charge. And so how do I engage and invite younger generations to speak into that type of scenario, to bring their best selves into it? It's not impossible. I mean, we see Paul writing to Timothy, right? And says, do not despise your youth. Don't let other people despise your youth. We see Jeremiah being called in his youth and God speaking to him. So it's not that the church or that the God that we serve only values or says that only older people have something to say. But there is this, I think, commonality of multi-generational dynamic that we all have to assess and take into account. And I think mileage varies depending on the culture of the community, of the organization. I would say generally, though, we have more work to do, than not. I think that it tends to kind of go more the other way, where we kind of tend to, like you said, look down and go and not see assets in younger generations, but limitations only. And I think there is a combination, right, that we have to look at.
It was interesting. We just had our denominational national conference, and 3 or 4 of our 30-year-olds went. And my daughter's on staff here as a pastor, and she's 30, and she's on this kick and was like, we don't have one delegate nationally under the age of 40. And so she went just to sit as an observer, saying, you need to have, she's like this activist, like, why don't you allow, it's not like we need to be in control,
right,
but why don't we allow that happen?
Or invite it, not even allow it, right?
Yeah.
Pursue it,
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there are blind spots. We do things the way that they've been done. But I remember in David Kinnaman's book, You Lost Me, and where he really examined the lives of folks that were in their 20s and 30s who had disaffiliated in different ways. And he had different groups. Some he called the nomads, that they had become disenchanted from organized religion or churches, but they didn't necessarily stop believing. There were the prodigals, who were the ones who, like the prodigal son idea, where they have left and are gone, but he uses prodigal very intentionally to say, because the prodigal did come back. And sometimes we kind of just make someone stable in one place. But then he also talks about the exiles. And the exiles are the one, I think, particularly like what your daughter was kind of speaking to. The exiles is kind of a deep category for Kinnaman. They are those who, in order to retain their faith convictions authentically, feel like the only thing for them to do was to leave. Like in other words, to stay in the system would have been to compromise. And so they're in exile in that sense. And so what Kinnaman was observing, and I think which is helpful, is that there's even multiple reasons why people, younger generations, are disaffected, you know what I mean, from the church. And so I think we have to look at that, and then we have to look at ourselves and imagine and ask the question and invite inquiry into how we're doing. Like, is there spaces?
I love it.
Yeah.
I love your commitment to your church and to the various things you do to the Word of God, because that's what's going to hold us, and especially in today's world, right, more than ever. And so as you look at that, and with the different ways of doing that, especially with the issues of artificial intelligence, the digital world in which we're in. I just taught a class on morality in our leadership course here at the church, and how it becomes really impossible to lead an organization in the marketplace when we are losing truth and we're losing trust. And you lose a society when you lose those two, right? And so as believers, we believe in absolute truth, even though it's not as accepted around that. I'd be intrigued, maybe this is a stereotype, but when we think of your church, not your church in particular, but in New York City, we think of, hey, it is an incredible mission field, but you would have way more challenges than in a West Michigan Dutch base, although let's just put that clear, that Grand Rapids is 30% minority. Right. So gone are the days of what is labeled here. But nonetheless, New York City's got this history of the nation's melting pot of the world, right? How does one take that passion that you have to the church in which you're engaged and not compromise that word, but do it in a way that you said your church is very young in age, to connect with them, that would be appealing? Yeah.
I'm going to try to peel this back in layers real quick. One thing that we have in common, most people don't know, is that New York, you know what the original name of the city was? A little bit of history here.
I feel like I have known this in a random movie, but I do not know.
A random movie.
New Amsterdam.
I did know that.
Yeah. There were, apart from the Lenape Native Americans who were there, but from a European settlement standpoint, the Dutch were the first Europeans to settle in New York. And then, of course, there's the whole challenging history of colonialism and displacement of Native American folks. But the English then took it from the Dutch, and that's where it became New York. But one of the oldest Dutch Reformed churches, I actually have preached at it before, is in Brooklyn. It's called Flatbush Dutch Reformed. It's like 1660 something when it was created. So like early.
I think that's what made me remember that, because it was one of the revivals that I researched.
Yes,
It was called.
So there's a little bit of a connection there, but I think the other thing that is another layer is that obviously New York is very diverse now. I mean, something like 50% of the population, had parents that were born someplace else in the world, right? So it's incredibly diverse. Anglo, white folks are the minority in the city of New York, right? So it's an incredible diversity. But even in Brooklyn, there's a variety. We have some people who don't have any church background. We have a lot of people, though, who, had become de-churched, right? Like they grew up in the church and then they left, and then they were starting in their 20s to kind of search for something deeper and more and give it another go. And they found us. The number one way people find our church is through a Google search. So you want to talk about the internet and search engine optimization and things like that. That matters now. And whatnot. So we have to pay attention to that. But I think that when we talk about artificial intelligence, when we talk about these things, it's interesting because the Pope recently just, put out a long 35, I think they call it encyclical about expressing warnings about, the very things you were just talking about. And of course, there isn't a kind of doomsday cursing the darkness type of approach. I think too often Christians have fallen into that, where anything that's new, we just go, but on the flip side, you can have an approach where you just absorb mindlessly anything that happens. And I do think that there's an important role for the church to be able to cast vision and to give framework for understanding for younger generations of how to leverage living in a digital age in which the complexities of morality and truth. I mean, I just saw a New York Times article today where they were evaluating essays to see how many of them were written by artificial intelligence. You know what I mean? My daughter, when she was in college, she had, classmates that were doing that all the time.
Yeah,
and
true.
So how do I think about my moral, formation? I think that what the word gives us is this incredible one of the things, again, I hate to nerd out a little bit, but I love history, is that one of the great contributions of Christianity, I think of Judaism before it, was the value of literacy, like literally to understand who God is and how to live. The way to do that was to understand how to read the word, and so in part of that reading of the word, and even all of the literary criticism and thoughtfulness that comes with it, comes a certain type of understanding that becomes helpful across the board. And so I think we need to become heavenly minded and of earthly good. We need to lean into ways in which and this was something that was in You Lost Me in Kinnaman's book, where he talked about how frequently do we actually talk about workplace issues and affirm vocation and calling from the pulpit, and recognize and create space for the fact that what most people are going to do when they walk out that church, and I see the sign, now you're entering the mission field, right here at Kentwood, that how are we equipping people for that work that they're doing and giving them a vision for it that goes beyond simply try to evangelize the people at your job. There was a great book by Dr. Amy Sherman called Kingdom Calling. She was kind of discipled by Tim Keller in this, where he wrote in Every Good Endeavor, was thinking about the role that the church can play and Christians can play at their job. And she looked at 4 different quadrants. One of the quadrants was Bible study and sharing your faith. That was kind of a more pietistic, devotional approach. But she also looked at other ones. What am I doing that can make my field, my industry, more ethical, more Christ-like? What are ways that we can encourage my company to do things, works that are helping the poor, the unfortunate, that are doing things? So like all of these different aspects or tools that we can have, that the church ought to be the ones that are in the forefront of helping people cast a vision for what they do and what they're training to do, can be more than just a way for them to earn an income and to raise a family, but can be ways in which they are. But see, that creates a vision. I'm sorry, I got to preach for a second here.
All right.
That part of that is a gospel that goes beyond just a get out of hell free card. Far too often when the world gets very complicated and hard, that the Christian response is just, let's just try to focus on Jesus. Let's get in our little holy huddle and just hope that God just comes quickly. Whereas the gospel calling initiative, we go all the way back to the Genesis, right? The cultural mandate, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Or even going back into exile in Jeremiah 29, when he says, look, build homes. You know what I mean?
Comfortable.
Get comfortable, settle down. But then he says, seek the peace and prosperity of the city where I have sent you, for in its prosperity,
and you will prosper.
You will find yours. And that tells me that there is a way in which, and we pray in the Lord's Prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done, how? On earth as it is in heaven. That's not just a prayer for us to get to heaven. That's a prayer to make earth more like heaven. And that's part of the way that, and the beautiful thing about it, when we get involved in that work at our church, we partner with another church that really focuses on folks who have addiction issues or have come out of prison and things like that. Like that's kind of what they're built to do. And so we make as one of our serving teams serving with that church. It's called Next Steps Community Church. There's a justice ministry at our church, Pray March Act. I know when I walked in here and I saw the immigration connection and things that you're doing, these are ways in which we can be really God's hands and feet. And when we do that, that actually happens to be something that connects to the younger generation and say that we actually care about things that happen in this world. We're not just escapists in our mentality. And so I think that the more we lean into those things, the more that we can give a bigger vision. But that's a bigger gospel vision. And so that's what we try to do at our church. And I think we try to encourage people with that. And I think last thing I'll say is every city has its complexities. One of the things I had the opportunity to share with Thrive and Prosper, which is organized by Pastor Artie Lindsay here in the city. And we talk about So in that Jeremiah 29 passage, when it says build homes and it says eat, plant gardens and eat the produce of the city. It's so interesting. He tells them to eat the produce. And I take that to mean enjoy the city. So often it's like kind of hard to get Christians to talk about what they like about the city. You know what I mean? It's like, but God has put us in cities to be able to actually, have a heart for those folks. That was the issue with Jonah, right? You know what I mean? Like he didn't want Nineveh to respond. He didn't want, and then when they did, he was mad at God that they repented. And it's like, because he didn't love the city.
Too kind. God.
And at the end, God asked him this question, like, there's over 300,000 people. Like, you're mad that the tree that provided you shade died, but what about the people that are in this city, in Nineveh? And so we have to learn how to love our Nineveh, as well.
That's right. Man, this is so rich, Michael. We could go on and on and on, but we got to have this brother back. There's about 10 topics that we could have went down. We could be on for hours, but you have whet our appetite, and obviously God has anointed you to address multiple layers of the church, and we deeply, deeply appreciate that of your freshness in this approach. And I really do want to have him back. But Michael, why don't you close us out and how you feel appropriate at this time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the good thing is that we know he'll be back once a month, so we can schedule around that, right?
Yeah.
Well, Rasool, for real, thank you so much just to hear your heart and your love for the gospel and the lost, and it's just been a huge blessing. And but I would love for you to share just how can people get in touch with you and know more about you or check you out on social media.
Absolutely. Well, first I just want to say that with our Daily Bread Ministries, we offer so much more than just devotional booklets.
Yes, that is true.
So I would encourage folks to check us out, our dailybread.org or odb.org. And encourage folks to. One of the projects that we have is called Immerse. It's a way of engaging the Bible it's a Bible without like verse numbers and like topics, like titles, and it helps people read it more and immerse in it. And so that's a great resource that can be used church-wide. But for me personally, you can go to just Instagram, Rasool B. It's not Russell. Rasool, Rasoolb. You can check me out there, and just know that you'll also get some sports commentary because I'm a passionate sports fan as well. But yeah, thank y'all so much for having me, and I love what is happening here at Kentwood, and hope that I can come back sometime.
Absolutely, man. We definitely can do that. Well, I usually say I hope this blessed you, but I have no doubt it did. So we thank you guys for tuning in and checking us out. Wherever you find us, whether you're watching or listening, please subscribe to the channel. We got more great content and great guests coming down the pipeline. So as always, we just pray this is a blessing. We hope that you enjoyed this. Tune in for more. We thank you for checking us out. And as always, we'll see you next time here on The Devout Route. Take care.